Now this is a very special edition of Digging the Coast 365. Do you know what it is, Julie?
The day after Sadie's birthday edition?
No, dogs don't have birthdays. It is the 300th day of this trip.
Yay!
It won't be when you're watching this, it'll be about 306 days, but today is my 300th day and we're at Ardvreck Castle. Let me tell you all about it. So here we are in Ardvreck Castle. It was built in 1490 for the MacLeods, who had been in this area since about the 1200s. This is called Loch Assynt, is it? Assynt? Loch Assynt? Have I said that right? Assynt. I said it 3 times. It's still making me sound as if I'm saying it wrong. I'm not. Loch Assynt down there. And the whole area is called Assynt, and they've had this place since the 1200s. I've no idea what this room would have been. Big circular room. It's quite impressive. It's just the views you get from here which are the best part. It's just absolutely beautiful down there. Ugh. Not down there though. So originally when they built this it was 3 stories high and rectangular in shape, but not very big. So what you'd have had all around this area is little barns and little huts where all the servants would have lived. But then 100 years later someone came along and he put in a big tower and the dungeons, as you can see now, underneath. So the castle is most well known for somebody who had held here back in 1650. There was a battle called the Battle of Carbisdale, and there was this guy, I'll have to read his name off my list, hang on. He was called James Graham, the Marquis of Montrose. We'll call him James, yeah, James Graham. Now he were fighting against the Crown, right? He were a bit of a baddie, a rebellion, and he were fighting against the Crown. Now, he had twice as many men as the Crown, but the Crown won this battle, they kicked his head in. He got a bit injured, but he managed to escape from the battle, and he disguised himself as a shepherd and made his way to this castle and pretty much begged them to take him in and look after him. So he knocked on the door and he says, "Hey, is Neil in?" She says, "No." He meant Neil MacLeod. She says, "No, he's away on business. Can I help? I'm his wife, Christine." He says, "Yeah, well, I was just hoping you could help me out. I've just been in a battle, got a bit wounded. I've got the royalists after me, and I'm not too happy about it. Can you sort me out? Give me somewhere to stay for a bit?" And Christine realises who she is. He's just been fighting against her dad. Her dad was on the other side. So she tricks him. She says, "Yeah, come on in. Neil's not here, but I'll look after. Don't you worry, darling." I think he thought he were going to get a bit, and he wasn't. She led him into the castle, down to the dungeon area, and locked him in the dungeon. Tricked him. So Christine, she picks the phone up and she rings the police. She says, "Hey, I've got this traitor here who you're looking for. You've just been fighting him in a battle up there, and he's come here asking us to look after him. We don't want him." So the police come along, pick him up in a car. You know, a very old kind of car, before cars were invented, more like a horse-drawn carriage type thing really, with a jail on the back. And they took him to Edinburgh, and he got hung, drawn and quartered for being a traitor. And they put his head on a stake and took it to Aberdeen, and it stood there for 13 years, so everyone could see this traitor. James, the Marquis of Montrose. Scumbag.
Do you know that he haunts this castle?
Do I know that he haunts this castle?
Yeah,
He doesn't own this castle, but some people do.
There is a grey spectre that has been seen about the castle.
There is a grey spectre. It's not him. It's not him. It's just another grey ghost. You're just putting 2 and 2 together. Because when he turned up here, he was dressed as a shepherd. Yeah? He won't have been in grey.
Okay.
So he won't have been the grey ghost. He'll have been in brown, probably. So 22 years after this battle, in 1672, the Mackenzies were around. They're always around. They've done this in loads of places. Mackenzies were around and they got a bit bored and they thought, "I'll tell you what, let's go have a fight with them MacLeods." So they came here. They had a 14-day battle with the MacLeods. The Mackenzies won, they always did. Kicked them out. So the Mackenzies then had all this area. This was all theirs then. They only did it, I think all they wanted really is somewhere to go fishing and have, you know, sell like boat rides and stuff to tourists. I don't know, to be honest with you, but I can't see any other reason they'd want this area, but they did. Anyway, in 1795, the castle was struck by lightning and destroyed. That's the history of the castle, but there's ghost stories as well. So this ghost story involves the devil himself. Before the castle was built, MacLeod was sat in a bar and the devil walks in and sits next to him. And the devil says, you know what, I'll build you a castle if you want, if you give me a soul. And MacLeod thinks about it and he says, I'm not bothered about that. I'd rather have immortality, to be honest with you. So anyway, they sat at the bar talking about it, negotiating, and MacLeod's daughter walks in. MacLeod's daughter walks in and she orders a gin and tonic, and the devil sees her. He says, I'll tell you what, MacLeod, let me marry your daughter and I'll build you that castle. And he thinks about it, he thinks, well, that's a good swap, don't need my daughter. You know, people didn't care about the kids as much in them days. It was just the boys to take over the properties and stuff. Women, certainly the girls, they weren't important. So he let him marry his daughter. The castle was built and they had a wedding. They got married and then she realised that it was the devil she'd just married. And she was absolutely distraught. Now, the first thing I'd like to say is, how did she not notice it was the devil before she married him? You know, he'll have had big horns and a big red tail. You notice things like that, don't you? So she shouldn't have married him anyway. But stupidly, she must have had her eyes closed all through the ceremony, didn't realise it was the devil. She was absolutely disgusted with her dad and distraught. She thought, I cannot live with the devil. So she jumped out of that window and plummeted down here into the loch area, which is grass. That's what it says in the record books. Maybe the loch was a bit higher, I don't know. And she's said to be seen crying and weeping around the ruins of the castle and around the beach area at the other side of the castle to this day. Now, there's another side to this story, Majulie's been saying. What have I got wrong, do you think?
It's the side you will much prefer.
Yeah, go on.
Apparently, the deal with the devil happened.
Yeah.
And MacLeod betrothed his daughter to the devil.
Don't use words like betrothed, because I don't know what they mean.
She realised immediately what she had done, and she threw herself from the high tower.
Yes.
And went to live in the caves underneath the loch to avoid the devil, and became the mermaid of Assynt.
So she became a mermaid living in the caves here. That story's rubbish. There's no caves. There's no caves, Majulie.
Under the water.
Under the water?
Under the water.
Where? Where exactly?
If you enjoyed
Show me one.
You would know.
There's no caves under that water. That's rubbish. My story's true, and I'm always right. And as we've explained, there is a man in grey ghost which wanders around here, but we don't know who he is, so that's rubbish. It is not the Marquis of Montrose. That's rubbish. It's just some other dude. Right, we're going to take you just over here now, because there's another house. We see a house in the distance. Why is there a house there? I'm going to tell you. So there's the castle down there. And here's the house. It's called Calda House. Let me get out of the wind and tell you a bit about it. So I'm now stood inside Calda House. Now, as I explained, the Mackenzies took the castle over there, yeah? Kenneth Mackenzie. And he got on the phone to his wife. He says, "Here, Francis," that was her name. "Francis, get yourself over here. I've just won a castle for you to play with. You can come and live here." So she turned up at the castle. She tried it out and she just turned round to Kenneth and says, "Kenneth, it just stinks of wee. Stinks of MacLeod wee. I can't stand it here, it's rubbish. Build me a better house." So in 1726 he built this for her. It had 14 bedrooms and it was one of the nicest houses in the north of Scotland. Absolutely stunning. So 11 years after the house was built, The Mackenzies threw a big party. It was massive. They had they were playing Eminem. They had glitter balls, everything. It were all kicking off here. Smoke machines, the lot. Anyway, they were partying until well into the early hours. And oddly enough, you're not allowed to, you see. It was on a Sunday. It was Saturday night when they had the party. By Sunday, they should have stopped at midnight. God wouldn't have been happy. And indeed, he wasn't. So ironically, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and Paranoid came in, which is a song by Black Sabbath. Just as that was playing, God came over and he struck the house with lightning for, you know, playing music on the Sabbath, having a party on the Sabbath. They were all taking drugs and everything in here. So he struck it with lightning, it burnt down to the ground, and everybody inside died, apart from one piper who stopped playing at 12 o'clock at night. He wouldn't play after that because of the Sabbath. So everyone else died, and apparently there's ghosts, dozens of ghosts, drunken, drugged up, moshers, ghosts, all in here, partying away every night. Now that's one story. There is another story, which is that Frances, this Mackenzie's wife, she just spent too much money. She was spending all this money, he couldn't afford to keep the place anymore, so he ended up having to put it for sale, sold it through some estate agents down south in Glasgow, I think. Can't remember the name of it. Anyway, I think it was McManus and Poole. Can't remember. Anyway, the Sutherlands were going to buy it. The Sutherlands, they put an offer in, it got accepted. But the people who supported the Mackenzies did not want the Sutherlands around here. The Sutherlands and Mackenzies did not get along. So the supporters of the Mackenzies burnt the place down so that the Sutherlands couldn't live here. That's just another story, but it's not as good as the first. Another one is that the Gun clan came and burnt it down because they heard all the Mackenzies were inside it. I don't know anything about that. Me Julie's just told me.
We will meet the Guns later on our trip.
We'll meet the Guns later. That's spelled G-U-N-N-S to you Americans, so don't get too excited. Apparently, after the fire, they were just going to start rebuilding it, but the Crown turned round, the King and all that, they turned round and says, hang on a minute, you weren't on our side during the Jacobite War. You were bad people. So I'll tell you what, we'll have all your estate now. Bye-bye. So the Mackenzies packed the bags and they disappeared forever. And since then, Calda House and that castle, can't remember its name, have just been ruins. Fact. So here we are at the X-Craft Memorial. It's a World War II memorial. When you go back to the Germans in World War II, they had the main battleship was called the Tirpitz. And the Allied forces really wanted to bomb this Tirpitz. They wanted rid of it. And they tried bombing it with aeroplanes many times, but just couldn't do it. Couldn't seem to do it. And it was quite heavily guarded by submarine nets, big nets which they had around to stop torpedoes and big submarines from getting through to try and bomb it. Now the problem with the Tirpitz is where it was near Norway, and it was stopping a lot of boats from going from Britain to Russia to try and supply them with guns and ammunition. So it was quite important to try and get rid of it. Anyway, they couldn't get submarines in because of these nets, and they couldn't bomb it by air. So what they decided to do is try to use the X-Craft. What is the X-Craft, I hear you ask? The X-Craft is basically, let me put my hood up, it's throwing it down, man. Scotland, that's all it does. The X-Craft was basically like a mini submarine. It was only 52 foot long, and it was actually known as the midget submarine. And they used to train them here in this lock. The lock is called Loch Cairnbown. And they were training in this area, and they had an idea. Let's send 6 of these X-Craft to try and bomb the German ship. So they put 4 men on each of these ships, and they were dragged out by big submarines to the area. Unfortunately, 2 of them were lost on the way to the area. One of them had mechanical failure, and one was sunk by the Germans, leaving just 2. There was just 2 left, but they decided to continue and still try to bomb the German ship. So they managed to get through the torpedo and submarine nets, because the Germans lifted them out whilst a German boat was going through which had German sailors on it. So when that happened, they sneaked in there. The first one actually hit a rock and it sprung a leak, but before it gave up, it did manage to let off its explosives before it then had to surrender because of this leak, so they had to surrender. The second X-craft, that managed to let off its explosives, but the explosion itself damaged their X-craft and 2 of the men were killed and 2 of them were captured. So they didn't manage to destroy it, unfortunately, but they did do it a lot of damage. And the next year, about 6 months later, it was actually destroyed by Lancaster bombers anyway. So these X-crafts were used throughout World War II on various dangerous missions. And what you've got here is a remembrance to all the people who didn't make it. You've got 39 people mentioned on there, and only 7 of them were actually buried. The other 32 were lost at sea. There is actually one error on here which I want to point out. Let's get his name right. It says J. Kerr of the Highland, where is it? Second Lieutenant of the Highland Light Infantry. That's actually wrong. It's Lieutenant Kenneth Kerr of the Royal Scots. So let's get his name right, guys. But yeah, that's to commemorate all the guys who were training here and all the guys who died, unfortunately. Sad story, but very, very brave submariners, if that is a word. I do like the name X-Craft though. Sounds like a cool game. So that's it for today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. I'm very sorry to you guys who aren't that interested in the history side of things. That's probably the one where I've really drilled history down your throat. I know some people will really appreciate that. Some people will just want to see me digging. I'm just making the best of a bad situation. If I can't dig, if the weather hasn't been good enough, I'm just trying to give you anything I can. And I'm quite proud of that video, to be honest with you. I think I edited it well. There was some good stories and good history in there. So I just hope you do appreciate it. If you don't, just bear with me, yeah? You'll get what you want. I'm trying to please everybody at the moment. But thank you very much for watching. Please keep the donations coming in. Go to diggingthecoast.com and click donate. All the links are in the description. See you next time. Good night.
Did it take it?
Yeah.
Wow.